Hello and welcome to the Coffee and Comics Club. I am Todd A.
I'm Taylor Trask.
Hello, Taylor.
Good evening, Todd.
Good evening. I am very excited to learn what these coffee gadgets are that you have been teasing me through text with for the past few days.
Yes. So for our listeners who may not know, in each episode we talk about the coffee we're drinking as well as the comics or graphic novels that are tickling our fancy at any particular week. And we've been a little bit sort of lacking in the coffee part of that equation for the last couple episodes. So in an effort to rectify that, I, using some birthday funds, went out and grabbed some toys. And these are things that I have wanted for a while. So this isn't like I just was like, spur of the moment, random purchases. This is fulfilling Amazon checklist items. And
Nice.
and these are two things I'll preface by saying, I've been a French press fan, but I've been an AeroPress fan for a long time now. We've talked about the differing ways I can do an AeroPress. I've gotten pretty savvy at it, but I've missed two crucial components. One is a gooseneck, they call it a gooseneck pour-over coffee kettle, but it's just a gooseneck water kettle. Essentially, it's the one that you see in a lot of professional, like niche coffee shops, where it's the neck begins at the bottom of the pitcher, not at the top, which a lot of classic stovetop steam pitchers or whatever kettles have. It starts in the bottom, and they usually have a thermometer in the top, which mine does. So not only can you get perfectly accurate water temperature every time, but you also are always guaranteed where that temperature is being drawn from is where the water is first emanating out of, not the top where it's going to be cooler. So you get perfectly calibrated temperature in your water. And it also has that really thin nozzle at the top, so you can really be precise with how you're pouring over grinds or tea leaves or whatever. So I got the Bean Envy gooseneck pour-over coffee kettle from Bean Envy, 40-ouncer. Came in the same order. I've been wanting a hand grinder, specifically a conical burr mill hand grinder for a little while. Go Google burr mill grinder and you'll get all the wonderful facts about it. It's a wonderful way to ensure really good grinding, and you can control the settings usually, like from coarse to fine to very fine. If you go to very fine, it's almost like a powder. It's crazy. So you can get really specific with it. And it's also I'm all about the aesthetic of of the work that goes into making coffee. So not only are you hand grinding it, but you're getting your beans, you're putting in your AeroPress, the whole process is very methodical. So this is like kind of the final component of that physical act of making the coffee, that sort of ceremonial aspect of it.
Yeah.
And it also makes it my electric grinder was always, I never would get the full amount of grinds out of the grinder. So it was, because it would, residue behind and things. This way I'm getting, consistent grinds that are all utilized with no leftover every single time. So it's always a fresh cup. I don't have leftover I have to store for 2 days. Anyway, it's wonderful. And I had a sample cup earlier this afternoon upon these things arriving, and it was probably the best cup of coffee I've ever made. I will be very excited to continue on and experimenting. And now that I have kind of all my pieces assembled, so I think I'll be talking about coffee way more often.
You wake up in the morning, you get some whole beans, you put them in your hand grinder, you fire up the kettle, 45 minutes later, you're enjoying your first cup.
I would say 15 minutes max.
Right.
It's funny you say that though, because several years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I remember seeing on Kickstarter, somebody was trying to fund a grinder that was also a roaster. So you would roast your bean, you put your whole beans in, roast them, and then grind them so that you have the absolute freshest flavor no matter what. And I know they met their funding goal. I don't know if it ever released. There's a crazy coffee shop in Portland that has every cool gadget you can think of. I'm assuming they would have it if it existed. So,
well, I got no good coffee reports. I'll tell you though, I may have sort of hit my limit on just blindly consuming Starbucks though. I love my charred roasted beans from Starbucks, but I may just sort of have to tap out there. So I've been investigating some cold brew options and trying to figure that whole thing out, because that may be an easier thing for me to make in the house. But right now I'm drinking a Simple Truth seltzer water, which is a Ralph's grocery store thing, which I usually don't buy because, speaking of that artisanal water, I got one of those fizzy maker things. What's it called? The Soda Stream. That's what I got. But I was extremely lazy today and I wanted a lemon lime seltzer. Anyway, it's called Coffee and Comics because we generally talk about one.
I vote we change it to Seltzer and Stories. I think you've proven that we are missing a market here with the seltzer talk. We'll put it to a vote.
20% more belching. Because we talk about one sort of graphic novel or collection a piece, but I know that that's not what you're talking about tonight, and you know that that's not what I'm talking about tonight. We both picked sort of different stuff to talk about. So what are you talking about? What have you read for us this week?
Well, sort of atypical for me, I have a single issue. And it is a Marvel single issue.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That was not what I expected when you told me a single issue.
And there's no way I'm not even going to tease it, because there's no way you would ever guess what it is. It's a single Marvel issue from 2015. It is number 2 of the Ultimates run from 2015. And it's number 2. It's got Galactus on the cover in the Da Vinci whatever that man, I forget the name of the man drawing. You know what I'm talking about, that famous medical drawing. Anyway, it's got Galactus on the cover, and it's just issue number 2. It's not like it's subtitled anything, as far as I can tell. A
transported man.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not it.
No. It does say on the inside cover page, and that's not even a subtitle. So it doesn't really give you that. It's by Al Ewing, Kenneth Rocafort, there we go, and Dan Brown. Probably not that Dan Brown, but...
So this is not the Ultimates 2 series. This is number 2 of the Ultimates?
Yes, okay. Which is a series, and it's on the Ultimates team in this issue is Captain Marvel, Black Panther, I think Miss America, Spectrum, and Blue Marvel, which I'm not that familiar with. I'm assuming some. What's that?
Me neither.
Yeah, just like it was Blue Marvel. That must be some deep cut sort of Miss Captain Marvel offshoot. Anyway, it's that team. It's sort of like a Space Avengers, and they solve the really ridiculous, crazy problems. And in this particular one, I didn't read issue 1. The only reason I know this issue exists, and the reason I'm talking about it, is because it's all about the Galactus origin story. I had seen IO9 back in its better days when it actually did credible comics coverage, unlike today. They had a wonderful little preview of this. Charles Pullman. They did a wonderful review of this issue, and I remember them calling out like, this is a Galactus origin story. And I remember thinking, I don't know if I've ever even heard of his origin story, and that sounds really freaking compelling, because I love Galactus as a character. It's like for some reason I've always, ever since that Silver Surfer cartoon that aired on Fox in the 90s, that was my introduction to Galactus, and I was always just like, what a cool, interesting idea for a character. So this origin story really intrigued me, and so I grabbed it digitally on Comixology, and it's a quick little story, but it picks up where apparently the Ultimates are trying to deal with Galactus in a permanent way. They know they can't destroy him, but it looks like they're trying to conduct some kind of grand experiment. So they kind of split up into different factions. 2 of them go to grab this sort of box that we don't know about yet, this giant spaceship kind of thing. One of them goes off to do something else, and then Black Panther goes into this sort of mind time machine to view the past, but then also transport himself across the galaxy to where Galactus actually is. So he gets a glimpse into Galactus's, like his reality kind of deconstructs T'Challa's, and the process he sees the final moments of Galactus before he became Galactus. And he started off as a scientist at the end of the previous universe, which is basically contracting back into a single point. So everything's collapsing. There's this group of scientists that are still around. There's like 7 or 8 of them, and they're trying to survive, past the end of the universe. and their leader is a guy named Galen, and that guy goes on to become Galactus. And I don't want to spoil the how that happens or what goes on. There's a crucial piece of that story ends up becoming involved in the Ultimates plan to sort of deal with Galactus, and you get to see at the end of the episode, the end of the issue, exactly what their plan is executed, and it succeeds, and you get to see what happens to Galactus when they kind of put all this together and use his past to deal with him. It's kind of super cool, and if you read past that, you'll know what that is, because it does carry on for numerous issues. Well past this series, I think it stayed in continuity in terms of how they handled him. But it's just like it's kind of like a little mini story that you could really read start to finish as its own thing. Like I never felt the need to know what issue 1 was or what the next 8 issues are. You can almost look at this as like just a Galactus one shot even. That just happens to have this collection of Avenger style, this Avenger style team sort of as the I don't even know if I'd call them the protagonists. They're just sort of there. They just kind of move the story along, almost like fairies from Shakespeare's time or something. Like there's fairy characters that kind of like give you the backbone to the story, and that's kind of what they're almost like a chorus, like a Greek chorus. That's the better way to frame it. The Ultimates are like the Greek chorus of this whole thing, which is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, just hearing you describe it, and when I looked up the cover to see that Da Vinci Transported Man cover. It looks like Galactus is on maybe 3 of the first 6 covers, and then Thanos is on the next like 4 of the next 6, and then Galactus is on the very last one. So I guess this is funny to just conjecture about a series that neither of us has really read or connected to, but yeah, I guess it's all dealing with sort of major intergalactic issues,
Yeah, and I might, knowing that, I might just peek at the next couple issues. But if you're interested in Galactus in any way, definitely pick this up. It's wonderful. You can grab it on digitally is probably the best way to do it. At this juncture, it just the colors really pop wonderfully on a screen, and the flow is more cinematic if you do it this way. And you keep yourself from being spoiled. There's some, I would imagine if you had this in a traditional book. You flip a page, you might see things that you shouldn't see until that exact panel comes up. So you may want to use Comixology view, or that any app that has like kind of the view flow.
Was it on Comixology Unlimited?
It might be. I bought it because I bought it the week it came out.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
I had seen the preview for it, and I was like, oh, I need this. So definitely grabbed it then. But I'm sure. I mean, the Ultimates probably. It seems like that's one of those things that would be easily available on Unlimited.
Well, have you followed anything that writer and artist have done before or since?
No, I mean, if I have, I didn't know it. I didn't really pursue. I have this weird thing if it's a big 2 title, unless it's like, one of the marquee titles like Dark Knight Returns or Killing Joke or, something like that. I really don't pay much attention to the team, but if it's an Image title or a Boom title, that's one of the first things I look at. Like, well, who did it? Who's involved? I don't know why I can't do that, because it's just as legitimate on the big 2, but I just don't have the same sort of. I just want to burn through the story and be done.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it looks like it was a 12-issue series, and the first 6 take place before Civil War II, and then the next 6 tie in.
Okay.
But I'm intrigued now, because it seems like, well, that breaks down into 2 really tidy trade paperbacks. And I wonder if they sort of, and it's the same team throughout. So I wonder, I just kind of wonder about a few of those like tie-ins and stuff, or how they led into Civil War II, which was a thing I couldn't get into at all. But
I have a really cool poster for Civil War II that you've seen, but that's
my
only knowledge of it.
Yeah, I mean, and the art that I'm seeing looks great.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's really vivid. Like I said, having it on a screen, there's a lot of cosmic kind of power that is amplified when it's, there's a panel of light behind it. That's kind of fun. So yeah, really great format for it. I mean, it's, as far as big 2 art goes, it's, you can't get any better than this. A lot of really cinematic, points of view and camera angles and everything. The one thing that it did make, and kind of revisiting it for this episode, because I'm like, I wanted to reread it because I wanted to feature it on this episode, but I also I hadn't consumed it for a while. I'm way more amped up for Galactus to be the next big arc for whatever the Marvel universe becomes, the MCU becomes post Infinity War. Like I'd really like, just that threat, especially because it's like you get Thanos and you're like, how do you get any bigger than that? And the idea of this monolithic force of nature that's, it's trying to destroy him is like saying, I'm going to destroy the sun. It's like, well, where do you even start?
I got a crazy question. Does Marvel own him?
Once the Fox Disney deal is approved,
he was in Sony though.
Because
if we think, because wasn't it Sony that had the Fantastic Four?
No, it was Fox.
Oh, it was. Oh,
yeah.
Why didn't they ever cross those two over? Man.
Well, Galactus appeared at the end of the second movie in that weird smoke monster form.
Yeah. I'm just wondering why the X-Men never met the Fantastic Four.
Because the universes were so different tonally.
Man,
it just
would have been the studio that killed Wolverine.
Yeah, but it's like, think about it. At that juncture, this was what, 2005, 2006.
You're right.
Nobody had even begun to think about this whole idea of a shared universe, even though it's obvious. It's like nobody was never that gutsy. And then it took 2 years later for Iron Man to be like, oh no, this will all be connected from day one, to really make everybody go, oh, you can do this.
Yeah.
I think Kevin Smith is probably the only guy who to connect a universe of movies prior to that.
I think, if the Red Apple conspiracies are to be believed, all Tarantino movies happen in the same universe.
Wait, whoa. How does Red Apple, what is that term?
Well, the Red Apple cigarettes are in every movie that he's ever made, and there's always references in between them. Yeah.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
You've got a rabbit hole to fall down.
It would be awesome to think that Kill Bill happens in the same, like in her history, Hitler died in Inglourious Bastards in the way that he did. Like that would be, God, that'd be fun to think about. All right, anyway, what is your pick, good sir?
Well, I'll tell you, I first of all, I think it's hilarious that you picked a single issue, because a few episodes ago we said, we're not really going to have like normal episodes anymore. And I felt like when you said that, I was like, oh, especially when it's a number 2, not even like a number 1 of a
yeah.
I went, oh, the gloves are off. Like the rules are out the window now. I can just pick whatever I want. I only learned about you picking a number 2 just now. But I had already run this past you, like, hey, is it okay if I talk about a novel and not that's not graphic at all? Mm-hmm. So that's what I picked. I last week went on a little mini vacation, and one of the things that I do on vacation is read books like crazy. So I read 2 novels over 3 days, and this first one I consumed all in one, maybe not one sitting, but in one day on 2 different planes. It is called The Last Policeman by Ben H. Winters. And it is the first part of a trilogy, which I did not know when I picked it up, but did know before I read it. And I read it with that feeling of like, this funny feeling of, oh man, am I going to get sucked into a trilogy here? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I sort of didn't, it's almost like I'm kind of avoiding, I don't know. I just didn't know what to expect. Like, I don't know that I'm up for 3 books on this, but it is a detective novel, which may seem strange to pick for this show. But it takes place in a small town, Concord, New Hampshire. It concerns this guy named Hank Palace. He is a brand new detective. Like, he's only been on the force for 16 months.
Hank Palace. How long did it take for them to come up with that name? That is such a great detective, like on the door in classic typeface name, like Hank Palace Detective Agency.
Oh, I should clarify. He's a police detective.
Oh, police detective. Okay.
That is the Last Policeman. So,
of course.
But he has been promoted very suddenly from just joining the force to all of a sudden becoming a detective. So he's young. He's read this, he's probably read a lot of things, but he refers constantly to this one textbook that sort of how he, when he approaches a crime scene, he divides it into quadrants, and then he goes, he combs through each quadrant, and he whatever, and it's like he refers back to the book that taught him how to do that. But the twist here is that it takes place in, I guess actually it takes place in early 2012 in our current world and everything. But in spring of 2011, astronomers noticed a pretty big asteroid headed towards Earth. And with every sort of passing month, they have, renewed, like, change, they've taken in new calculations and they've factored in new probabilities and et cetera. And at this point, the thing is going to hit Earth. There is a 100% chance. They just haven't announced where. They haven't triangulated that yet. And it is so big that it is going to change the planet fundamentally.
And this is all in 2012.
Yeah. So there is a Hank goes out on a call, and there's a dead man in a McDonald's, but McDonald's is out of business because everything crashed once they announced that there was a 100% chance that this asteroid was going to hit the Earth. So all the McDonald's just turned into sort of home businesses. So they still say McDonald's out front, but it's not actually a McDonald's. They just serve whatever they want. It's just kind of a diner that says McDonald's.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
Same thing happened to 7-Eleven and Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks. And Panera is still around, but some,
of course it is.
Like real like religious rebirth has happened to their owners. So yeah, so it's like you can't go in there without being proselytized too.
Oh wow. Yeah. See, which is it's almost like, I know. It's almost like you were improvising something knowing because I love Panera. Like I go there all the damn time, but it's like that makes the most, like that makes perfect sense. Of course that would happen. Like, yeah. Oh Jesus. Okay.
So Panera is a cult. Wow. And McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts are all just free for alls. They're like, so there are all these. I like how I didn't think of this term until I saw it in the summary. Pre-apocalyptic things happening, which is like a really great twist. Things are, it's not like we see a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff, or the apocalypse kind of stuff, like a zombie and uprising or something. But this is. This is, there's a lot of pretty realistic stuff about like, cell phones failing because a tower, towers will just be like in disrepair. And so there's just terrible signals all over the country because you're hopping cell to cell all the time. So if, one tower goes out or it's just sort of underserved in one area, like you just lose it, So some days you can make phone calls, some days you can't, like changes from hour to hour. So there's this real, I believe the author calls it like an existential detective story, which is why even bother trying to solve a crime when an asteroid is literally going to wipe out life in 6 months, but it also changes the stakes for everyone involved in this because they can go to sources or, snitches or whatever, people they can hold crimes over. Like, for example, he holds sort of a bust over a drug dealer. He doesn't bust him, but he knows he can. And the drug dealer knows this guy can if this guy just sends me to jail, it'll be 6 months before I have a trial and the world will end. So I don't, I will do whatever he wants not to go to jail. But there are also all these crazy happenings, like the police force is just decimated. There's like 5 detectives left. And that's because a bunch of the old timers, they just call them bucket listers. And they just withdraw their pension and they just go to an island, or they go to the Alps, or they go to Italy to learn how to paint or whatever. There's just like, live out your life. You're done. And there are also, just a ton of suicides. And that's where this, it turns out, like, and Hank explains, different towns have sort of different events, like one town will have a famous bridge where everybody jumps off, but in Concord, New Hampshire, it's Hanger Town, and they all hang themselves.
Oh, geez.
And one popular way of doing that is to put a belt around their neck, tie the belt off to some object on the wall or something, and just lean into it and let your body do the work. So that's how they find this body in McDonald's, is with a belt around his neck, So of course he being a young cop, he calls in the DA, and the DA is just unconvinced that this is foul play. It's obvious. It's a hanger. We got another hanger. But Hank is really persistent because he thinks it's odd that this guy has hung himself with a really expensive belt while he's still wearing a really cheap belt.
Mm.
And there are a lot of other tells. So he begins investigating this crime, and there are just all sorts of like any good detective novel, like great twists and money involved, and a whole like there's a great sort of riff on that, like cui bono, kind of who's benefiting from this death, and trying to run down that. It turns out this guy was an actuary with an insurance company, and insurance has changed completely
Oh, of
in
course,
in
yeah,
this
it's
day and age.
insane.
There's a big deal where they're just I believe I have this right, where they are just every claim that comes in, they say like, yeah, we'll have to investigate that, because they're just dragging their feet. They don't want to do any payouts because they know like everything pays out. The
Yeah.
end of the world is here. So, yeah, it is. It's great. And it's great also in that way of where, like any good detective novel, not a lot of shots are fired. The tension is just in people like brandishing a weapon or something. And you're like, oh shit, like this is some real danger. And all the while, it just has that crazy background story of this asteroid headed to Earth. His sister is involved with like this sort of crazy lunatic who's sort of he's in a conspiracy group basically about who thinks that the government has planned for this whole eventuality and built cities on the moon.
Oh God.
And so he goes like invading this, on a four-wheeler, like ATV, goes and just sort of single-handedly runs onto this military base to try to get some answers. And, so Hank's sister calls him to go check him out at the military base and, like see what he can do to get him free. And, like any other like good detective novel, it also like it's the feeling of like in a week's time, this detective gets more and more haggard with the job, like so much shit happens to this guy. And I was really drawn in by, there are a lot of ways that it tries to break those tropes. He's not a super experienced, jaded detective. He's like a literal by the book noob on the job, and when they'll sort of pull in his background story, it's like, I thought that the him being a newbie on the job was a great break with detective tradition. He wasn't the he wasn't the hothead like Mel Gibson, and he's not the old guy who's told for the shit like Danny Glover. It's this guy.
But does he talk about him as, if he's that new? You'd think that like he would have probably enlisted or joined when he when the news came out about the asteroid. So it's like, does he talk about his
no
because
he joined before that. So it's less than a year, I think, when the novel picks up since they've found the asteroid.
But like even so, does he talk about like what is his commitment to justice and all this stuff when knowing that the end is so close? Does he talk about like why he's even doing this work at this junction?
No, he sees it as and in fact he like answers that to people. He's like, look, the asteroid's coming, we're all gonna die, it doesn't matter, we do our jobs. Like he just sees it as, this is just how it works, like we can obsess about this and do nothing, or we can just do our jobs, and that's kind of what puts meaning in their lives. That's I think that's the way he would say it. Like for example, there's another detective who, in one scene, he's just caught up in watching videos of this like conspiracy theory where there's a little glitch in the astronomer's video when they gave this presentation, and it makes it look like maybe they cut part of it out. And, all these online conspiracists are wondering what happened in that little glitch in the video. And this detective just keeps watching it over and over and over. And Hank is he just doesn't understand this attitude. He's like, you're just trapped. You're lost in this thing, that guy has no, he's like he's so depressed and anxious that he's lost all meaning in his life. And Hank sees no other choice but to sort of soldier on and do his job. Plus he's waited all his life to be a detective, basically. I mean, you do get backstory on on his parents' deaths that inspired him, to this point in his life. And I hope it doesn't spoil anything. I don't think so. But there's one of the detectives, on the force who has been kind to him during the investigation into one of his parents' deaths. And so you learn that, like, there was a connection to the police force. And, he, from a young age, he was really pursuing this. So I think to him, it's sort of like, yeah, he's a detective at the end of times, but that was, that was the trajectory he was always taking. So, yeah,
I see why you picked this though, because this could easily be an image graphic novel. Easily, like this just has all the hallmarks of some of those great indie stories that I've taken to and you've reviewed, from time to time too.
Oh,
so
yeah.
it kind of very much a stylistic fit, I think, into the kinds of things we talk about here.
Yeah, so it is, and it was published by Quirk Books, which I've mentioned before because I've when I talked about the author Sam Maggs, she publishes through Quirk Books, and boy, did I just blank out on everybody else I know on Quirk Books.
Like others.
Hope Nicholson is on Quirk Books, and I follow several of their like editors and stuff on Twitter, and so I think I picked this up before I even knew that it was on Quirk Books, and that that I like it was kind of the first thing I got from them, and then ended up going, oh wow, this I like this publisher. But it definitely fits into that sort of I want to say they did like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, but I'm not totally sure.
Okay.
But that sort of feeling of like I don't know, a pop culture mashup with a genre. And so I think I know at one point when I was prepping for the episode and I'd Googled Last Policeman, I'd seen something about a film, but when I pulled up that Google search, I see from 2 years ago a news story that says NBC gives a pilot commitment to it. So I don't really know if it's being developed as a TV show, because it is a trilogy. So I can imagine that they could get a few seasons out of this.
Do you really think NBC is going to do that any justice, though?
No, it doesn't belong there. And I don't honestly like the TikTok of the detective novel works, but I don't know that that's going to work in a series like with an asteroid on the way. In a movie, it might be great. But I, my friend Boris had read this recently and recommended it to me, and I said, "Oh, that's been sitting on my Kindle for a couple of years," and just that was the winner when I got on the plane last week.
Nice.
And I'll say that it, just to do a plug for another book, it was a little bit reminiscent of this book called The Yiddish Policeman's Union by Michael Chabon, which takes place in an alternate history where the state of Israel was not created after World War II.
What?
But instead, I believe it was open to people of Jewish heritage from all over the world, were given a lease on a bit of land in Sitka, Alaska.
Oh my God.
The Yiddish Policeman's Union. So it takes place in Sitka, where he is investigating, I guess it's a murder. In the last days before that lease just dissolves. So it's basically like when Hong Kong was returned to China after their lease was up.
Yeah.
That's sort of what's happening in Alaska. And,
okay.
And the Jewish population there is having to decide whether to leave or not. The stakes weren't quite as high. They were just a lot weirder almost in the Yiddish Policeman's Union. But and the Yiddish Policeman's Union is more like literary take, I would say, on that. It was a little surprising to read such a, I don't know. Michael Chabon's, he's pretty much a nerd. But anyway, that's Last Policeman. I would highly recommend. I don't know what I'm going to do about the second book, because like all good trilogies, it ends with, some hints of what could come. And I'm sort of torn, like, well, if I do the second one, I got to do the third one.
How much do the conspiracy theorists, crazy people, play into it? Are they more just setting and decoration, or do they actually have meaningful story engagement?
it's setting and decoration.
Great.
Actually, that's a great point to bring up. And not, without giving anything away, that's one of those hints that makes you think, oh, the second book might be heavily
Oh,
into that world. And yeah, and some stuff happens that like just definitely changes the landscape of like, the relationships of people by the end of the book. So I don't want to give any details on that. I think knowing that like an asteroid's hitting in 6 months and you got this young detective trying to solve a murder, that's starting point enough to just like decide
yeah.
whether you want to pick this up and read it or not. I almost wish that they had smashed a few more detective novel tropes with it.
Mhm.
Because it just didn't go as far as it could have with him.
Mhm.
I think, and it's not that it needed any more of those sort of side issues or set decoration or whatever we want to call it, but more conflict from little background details.
Mhm.
But just it just like it could have been a woman, especially a young woman in this boys club of these like old detectives. Anything like that would have really,
Mhm.
like the one detective who goes kind of nuts watching the conspiracy videos and stuff is they sort of refer to him as like I think the joke is that he's the only black guy in Concord, New Hampshire. He's actually just the only black man on the force.
Uh-huh.
Uh, there's another interesting part of the force, which is because so many people have just bailed, they're just recruiting these like young men that Hank calls the buzz cuts. And it's basically just men that just want to beat the shit out of people.
Oh,
So there's all these
Jesus.
weird little like details
Oh
about
my
this
God.
pre-apocalyptic world where, it's like he's driving down the street and he sees a cop on patrol with his machine gun resting against his hip. And you're like, wait, what?
Wow.
Like you'll just sort of read that and you're like, well, actually, of course. And so they're getting to that point and they arrive at it by the end of the novel, which is um, they're not trying to solve crimes. They're just trying to keep order,
I just
and not even order, but just stop, chaos.
I like what you said though. I mean, I'll definitely probably pick it up at some point. I do like what you said though about wishing it could have subverted more of those detective tropes because as you were sort of giving some variations on what that could be, I was reminded of a couple really good Black Mirror episodes where they do just that. Because Black Mirror always seems to have kind of one of the off things about it, or the sort of the uncomfortable feelings you get from watching those episodes, is not only the twist, but just sort of the way they subvert a lot of those tropes
Right,
across
right.
different sci-fi stories. And what you sort of described, I'm like, yeah, that would feel really sort of it would kind of trip you up just enough so that
Yeah.
everything kind of had an unsettled feel to it. Just
Well,
because you're
so they break that trope of having like this fresh young detective, and he doesn't have a partner. Basically, like he has to interact with other detectives, but
yeah,
they're all
but
running their own cases.
I
But
mean,
then they
Blade Runner's
don't.
that.
Right, but then they don't break the trope of having the old guys constantly criticize him and not believe him.
Yeah.
Which would have been like a little bit more interesting. Like, well, what if they I don't know. There is actually a great camaraderie that you sense there. Like I really got a feeling for the characters of these detectives, but how much different would it have been if it had been a woman suddenly promoted to this position or a person of color? And it's like, oh, now there's like this additional mix into it. And you're not, it did that thing that you worry about in detective stories where, and any kind of mystery where you're sort of jumping ahead in your mind, so when there's like a woman is introduced, you're like, oh wait, is this gonna be a love interest, or there's like a mysterious other man introduced and you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna watch out for him. It's so you're still doing that, and I'm sure that the author to some extent wanted to do those things to give you a bunch of red herrings like in the detective tradition, but also to throw you off and make you wonder where he's going to uh, um, you know disconnect from the normal detective tropes. But it could have been like, it could have almost pushed that like a little bit farther with the, with some of the just genders and ethnicities of these people. I mean, you just get the feeling that it's like, oh, it's white Concord, New Hampshire. And, we're just watching a detective novel with this plot sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So, Yeah, it could have been a little. I love the idea that you pulled up Black Mirror because it's like Black Mirror will subvert a trope and then they'll just twist it a little bit and you're like, oh, what?
Yeah, yeah.
So Last Policeman by Ben Winters.
Rock on. Well, if you liked that review and ones like it, you can find more at by searching Coffee and Comics wherever you can get podcasts. Go to our website, findusthere.org, and also just look us up via Coffee and Comics Club on Twitter, Instagram, hashtags, all that good stuff. I am by Taylor Trask on Twitter.
I am Hey Todd A on Twitter and Instagram.
Excellent. And that's been great. I think we'll be back again next week. I've got a really good pick for next week, so can't wait to get into that one. It's going to be, I'll give you a teaser, it's going to be a multimedia pick. So very much a graphic novel, but one with a very interesting, intentional sort of hybrid thing going on with it.
I was worried that I knew with Last Policeman that I really didn't want to talk about details because I didn't want to give any of the detective stuff away, but it's, obviously the details are the things that keep your head turning and like pages turning. But I'll tell you, my pick for next week is another novel in which I can give a lot more details. And it's a very different story, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Excellent. Well,
cool.
Until then.
Yeah, until next time.